Welcome to Conversations with Chuck Hester, a weekly podcast designed to inform and entertain you and introduce you to some really interesting and inspiring people. I'm your host, Chuck Hester. My guest today is Miruna Dragomir, and she is the head of marketing for Planable. And a little bit about Miruna, Planable and Planable. Planable is a content review and marketing collaboration platform used by over 5,000 teams at brands like Jaguar, Land Rover, Viber, Siemens, and the United Nations. Miruna is a seasoned marketing executive and was previously a part of the Uber marketing team as well as Oracle's social media team. Miruna, welcome to Conversations with Chuck Hester.
Hi, Chuck, and thanks so much for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, absolutely. So, we would be remiss not starting out with your journey. And by the way, just for my listeners, if they haven't had a chance to look her up on LinkedIn, Miruna, you're actually in Romania, right?
Yeah, I am based in Romania, so the other part of the world.
Yeah, absolutely. And the Planable team itself, is there a headquarters for that as well?
Yeah, so our part of our team is here. We have another part of the engineering team in Chisinau in the Republic of Moldova, which is a neighbor of Romania. So yeah, we're half and half.
I do believe you may be my first international guest as far as that goes. So that's awesome. I always like to start out with a journey because you are where you are now, but that's not how you started out. So give us some background, especially, you're highlighting in your bio about the fact you've been on Uber's marketing team and Oracle's social media team. Walk my listeners through your journey and where you've come from.
Yeah, so that is pretty much my professional path, to say so. I started out at Oracle, which is, everyone knows what Oracle is, but I was part of the social media team, which was pretty big back then too. It was a few dozens people, and it was my first experience with social media and with such a large team, and I think it really, in a very poetic way, it prepared me for Planable because I got to be the audience that I'm serving now as a marketer. Then I moved on to Uber, which was a role a lot more focused on other parts of marketing, such as conversion, customer journey, customer experience. And then I landed the role at Planable, which is a very hybrid role as marketing at startups most often is. And it's why I mentioned that is because, at Oracle, the team was so large and we worked in so many ways and with so many different people. And when I got the interview at Planable and they showed me the product, I was, I very much needed this. And it very much helps me because to market an audience that you're so familiar with, it helps you a lot as a professional.
Yeah, totally makes sense as far as that goes. So let's talk about Planable. Tell me more about what the platform's all about and how users can take advantage of it.
Yeah, so Planable is a social media collaboration platform. That's what we always say about it, and that's because it's an environment where everyone involved in the social media content can get on, can see everything, how it's going to look like, can create posts, plan them, preview them, collaborate, review, and finally schedule them. So it really takes out all the manual process that usually happen and the, let's say, not adequate tools, because a lot of teams constantly do this in spreadsheets. They create those posts, the editorial calendar in a spreadsheet. They have a column for everything, for the copy, for the link, for the image, and so on and so forth. And that spreadsheet usually gets shared across all the other stakeholders that should leave their comments and review. And that information gets lost, then the manual process happens because you have to copy paste those cells and finally in a publishing tool. And so it covers all that behind the scenes.
Right. So within that, as far as that goes, so tell us more about the type of platforms that you do cover, and and honestly, let's also talk. This is going to be pretty social media focused for sure, which is one of my topic areas. But we'll get into these social platforms that are out there now and what you've seen as far as since you've been working with Oracle and all the way through to Planable, changes that have been made. But as far as Planable goes, what social media platforms do you cover?
So we cover Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn, Google My Business since a few months ago. And we've launched in beta silent mode, but soon to launch to everyone YouTube as well.
Wow. So you're covering a good percentage of it. Absolutely.
Yeah. We
So,
try to, kind of cover as much as possible of the manual process. And that means a lot of platforms too.
yeah. And so what type of challenges do you see customers coming to you with as far as how do I collaborate? What does that look like? You talked a little bit about, and I've done this. I mean, I've been in social media for, I guess, as long as you can be in social media since I've been in marketing for 40 years and grew up in social media and seen the changes that have been made, especially like LinkedIn. I've been in LinkedIn as long as you can be, 17 plus years. But to see the progression of what's going on with that. So what are some of the challenges that I know you solve, but what are the challenges that customers are seeing that are all of a sudden going, okay, now I've got to learn how to use whatever it may be, or here's my issues that I run into. What type of challenges?
Yeah, so I think the biggest challenge is the time aspect, but then that translates, saving time and saving the frustration that happens when you have to deal with manual process. Because social media professionals are creatives. They want to do strategy, to brainstorm on what they can do better, to spend that time in building content. And so when 30-50% of their time goes into copy pasting or gathering information, that tends to build up frustration. So that's one factor that I think applies to all of the audiences, and that's one challenge that they come to us with, and that can mean they don't do enough real-time marketing. Their content is not, they don't get the chance to spend enough time on it, those kinds of challenges. But it can be different depending on each company, because for an agency, time that's not well spent directly translates to we don't have enough clients and we spend way too many resources on one client, and the bottom line does not look well enough. For bigger companies, it can be about transparency within the company and the fact that they don't manage to have enough people involved, because when the process is faulty, you tend to keep people out of it in order to keep it as efficient as possible.
And you were with Uber back in 2016 all the way through now, and you've been with Planable, what, about 3 years? Is that accurate? Or
Yeah.
3 years. So you've seen the advent of video marketing, wide variety, as you mentioned, engagement marketing, those type of things going on. You've seen stuff, and we all have, the advent of Clubhouse, for instance, and everything else that's going on. What are some of the trends? And I've been a content marketer forever. I always like to say I'm a journalist graduate from USC, University of Southern California, and I was a marketer, so I guess I'm a content marketer. That's my running joke on that. But no, seriously, love this particular part of the industry. Love the creative side and being a chance to do that. I think one of the areas that drags me down, if you will, sometimes is just the mechanics of getting stuff into posts and the different platforms and how they work together or don't, for that matter. Are there platforms that you personally prefer? I mean, I know and this is not something that is a slam on me. I mean, I'm an older guy. You aren't, so it's different generational. But are there business platforms? Did Uber concentrate on particular business platforms that they were going after, and consumer platforms, for instance?
Well, at Uber, the focus was a lot more on the pipeline, to be honest, because Uber had such a huge brand recognition that the word would just get out. I mean, you would announce a campaign on Facebook and you wouldn't necessarily have to put it everywhere else because people would generally share it all on all the necessary platforms. So the problem wasn't necessarily to get the word out there on your campaign or on your special discount or whatever you were running as a marketer, but to ensure the conversion happens after that. People would see it, but what would they do about it? And so the focus was a lot on converting people along the way, from seeing the app to actually taking a first ride, or then to taking multiple rides and becoming a frequent rider, frequent customer. But I think Facebook, being at a very consumer platform and a very, let's say, wide audience kind of brand, because so many people go into the Uber audience, Facebook was a very great place to start with your announcements back then, at least. For me personally, I think love LinkedIn as well. You mentioned it a couple of times, and we're live on LinkedIn now.
There's a reason for that. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah, I have a personal affection with LinkedIn. I feel like in my professional life, it's brought me so much. It brought me so many connections, and so many people in the industry that I got to know and that I got to share content with and that I got to personally speak with. And I feel like this personal and yet personal and a professional on a professional kind of light on it helps it makes it a generally useful platform. And for me, it's very split into my professional life is on LinkedIn, my personal life is on Instagram, and they never really intertwine. It helps me be in the right mindset when I scroll through a platform.
Yeah, and that's honestly, I mean, that's kind of where I am, frankly. I am not an Instagram, Pinterest type of person, because I'm not visual. That's not who I am necessarily. So I do live on LinkedIn. I always tell people that, if you want to see stuff from me on Facebook, 90% of stuff you're going to see is my cooking over the weekends and, the backyard barbecues, that type of thing. But LinkedIn has become, and maybe talk about that as well. What have you seen as the evolution over the last several years since you've joined Planable? And even when you were at Uber, what are you seeing as far as changes in Facebook? What are you seeing as far as changes in LinkedIn? What do you like? What don't you like? I mean, and Instagram as well.
I think Facebook, for brands at least, because I always have this personal view on things. But Facebook has really grown in the group and community aspect of it. I feel like feeds have it's more and more difficult for people to keep their feeds clean. It's a lot of years in which they followed so many different brands. They have so many different people on there. It's different stages of life. You have high school friends on Facebook, parents and professional colleagues. It's a bit of a very cluttered environment in all of the senses. So I think that their groups, their communities, it feels like not many other platforms manage to create that. I mean, LinkedIn has groups as well, but they're nowhere near as powerful. And professional groups on Facebook are really skyrocketing.
Yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
No, go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's honestly, that's one of my consternations as a LinkedIn trainer, speaker, subject matter expert. I have always worked with clients on the 2.5 million groups that are on LinkedIn. And LinkedIn decided to head a different direction in regards to video and, multimedia, which, has worked very well, except for, and as far as I'm concerned, stories, which I think will finally be going by the wayside. But, the ironic part about it is I'm a member of several mastermind groups, including one that is a LinkedIn mastermind group, and they're all on Facebook because Facebook knows how to do groups very, very well. And they've also taken advantage, as they sometimes do, of the fact that LinkedIn isn't doing them right now. So that's run into. And maybe one other thing, Miruna, if you will, we kind of gloss over this these days. I always look at it as my also ran when I'm planning out my content calendars, but that's Twitter. What are your thoughts on Twitter?
I think it's really great. I think it's this new trend that has been rising and rising with Twitter threads are very much more up my alley, because that kind of storytelling is really an interesting. I mean, you would not expect that on Twitter. You would not expect people to go on Twitter to do that. I mean, the one thing we know about Twitter is that it doesn't like usually long form content. It's very
Right.
much about quickly say whatever you have to say. And I think that's a new interesting development. I personally don't spend that much time on Twitter because I haven't managed to curate my feed well enough yet. And it feels a bit like it accelerates my FOMO, my fear of missing out, because so many things happen all the time. And I'm like, oh my God, I missed 5 minutes of content. But lately I've found some of these threads that have been mind-blowing, and it's such a great way to digest content. It's almost like episodes, of a series, and you want to find what happens next.
Right. Yeah, and you mentioned it. You talked about and a phrase I think I'm going to steal, because curating your feed is something that I preach in regards to LinkedIn, and that is, go through your connections and your feed, get rid of the folks that don't make sense to you anymore, and concentrate on the ones that you can connect with well and directly. So I think that's probably a really good piece of advice for listeners in general. Take a look at your feed and see where you go. It's been a long time, quite frankly. I'm on Twitter once a week because I do a shout out to my uplifters. But honestly, that's about the only time I'm there, and unless I'm doing my client work with the agency I work with, I'm on Twitter for that. But personally, I live on LinkedIn, obviously, as far as that goes, and this is one of those examples. But I appreciate that. And Marina, we mentioned earlier that you are based in Europe, in Romania. Is there a significant difference on social media trends and platforms that are used in Europe versus the rest of the world, United States, for instance?
Twitter is less popular, for sure. LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram are all, up there. I don't know if there are many other differences. TikTok is up everywhere in the world, and it's becoming more and more popular here too. So no difference whatsoever there. Yeah, I think otherwise I don't see any main differences.
Okay. Well, and like I mentioned earlier, you are in Europe, and we talked a little bit before we went on the air, briefly. One of the questions, and I also mentioned this, I've mentioned this every time. I think it's maybe the last time I talk about this, but I think we're getting to the point where we're getting out of the COVID era, if you will. I will never call it the new normal. It's the new reality, and what we have to deal with. But how has COVID in general for Romania? How has it affected you? And you can talk about what we talked about a little earlier. But then, more importantly, how has it affected Planable and also the customers that you work with?
The common thread of all of that, I'd say, is the panic factor that happened at the beginning. That was seen across all the aspects of my life. In Romania, there was a full lockdown at the beginning, and it was very strict. So you wouldn't be able to leave your house, only with some documentation papers saying that you're either going to buy groceries, and you would only be allowed to buy groceries in the nearest store from your house, or buy drugs or anything else that was really urgent. And that happened for, I think, about a month or two, that kind of full lockdown. And then nothing really happened during the lockdown, because the lockdown happened in Romania before the first wave happened. So everyone was very optimistic. We were okay. We've got this. We've got almost no cases. We're talking about Corona down next.
Yeah.
That bubble very fast. It disappeared very fast, and we were able to see that it was just a phase. And then, restrictions, much like everywhere else in the world, gradually we tried different restrictions and we found which works, which doesn't. And when it got better, we lifted those restrictions, then they were put back in. And this kind of emotional roller coaster that I think the world has been in for the past year and so. For Planable, I mentioned the common thread because at the beginning we saw quite a few clients leaving due to COVID, due to rethinking their budget, most of them. That's the reasoning that they shared with us. I think the agency's side got hurt pretty bad at first, because I think a lot of companies at first wanted to cut down on their budget, and some of the agencies were the first ones to go.
Yeah. So we talked about this, Marina. We would be remiss if we didn't circle all the way back around as far as Planable goes. And what I always like to be able to do is say, okay, man, you've got some great information on the subject matter that we talked about, but also about Planable. So I understand that there's a walkthrough of the plans and what they look like, and also talk to us about a little bit what you have for my listeners.
About Planable, from Planable? Yes. So we're planning to do more and more for content creators. The whole purpose of Planable and the whole vision is to save as much time as possible and to make it super simple, dead easy for anyone involved in social to work together on it, to create it, and finally, publish it. As for what we have, what I can tell you is that anyone can try it, no strings attached. No credit card required. You can really try it out. We have a usage-based trial, and that means that you have no time limit to test it. The first 50 posts are free, so you can go in, see if it works for you or not, and make up your own mind. And we can offer special discounts for the listeners of this podcast. If you want one, just ping me on LinkedIn.
Okay. I always love it when my interviewees finish with "and check me out on LinkedIn." So I know you've been very accessible in that way. As a matter of fact, we talk back and forth on email, but we also talk on LinkedIn, which is great. Frankly, and it's a common theme for this is episode 23, but I think all 22 episodes prior to this as well. It was just a case of no matter where you are, head of marketing, whatever that may be, you're always accessible, which is the type of people that I like to have on the podcast to be able to use that well. And I want to, first of all, thank you for your time today, but also mention that I have not, but I will be trying out Planable, and in particular, and this is kind of a segue, for my organization called payitforwardtuesdays.org, and we'll get into that. But Miruna, thank you for the time today. I know it's right now about 8:30 or so in Romania PM, so I appreciate you taking the time out of your evening to join us today.
Yeah, thank you for having me. It was a great conversation.
I appreciate you. Okay, have a good evening. So that is, in fact, another edition of Conversations with Chuck Hester. And of course, if you listen to my program on a regular basis, you know that I always want to talk about my information, which is on the Pay It Forward initiative and what goes on with that. So I would be remiss if I don't, and I always do, shout out my Pay It Forward team on Pay It Forward Tuesdays, and that is Adam Sinkus and Brian Basilica, Jennifer Radke, Bob Shears, and all of the folks that are involved, Bridget McMasters and Jeffrey Pochet as well. We're excited because our nominations are in. We had 6 nominations this time around for May, and we will be announcing, as we always do on the 3rd Tuesday of the month, our latest recipient next week. You can get more information on Pay It Forward Tuesdays at payitforwardtuesdays.org or any of our social media channels, so check that out. And I always want to make sure you know that if you're a company or organization that provides products and services to small businesses, entrepreneurs, or 501c3s, charitable organizations, we are always looking for sponsors that can provide services and products in kind for our 2021 recipients. It's a great way to pay it forward while building brand equity in your community, and you can contact me for more details. Now, next week on May 19th, my guest is Michael Laporte. Michael and I have known each other for a long time, been trying to get him on the podcast for a while. He's the co-founder and global head of innovation at Go Interactive Media, and also the chief sustainability officer at Easy Wipe USA. We'll have a longer conversation about that because it's a really cool product line for that. So appreciate your time on that, and we'll look forward to next week. Be sure to feel free to share this podcast with your friends and connections, and there will be a replay of this on my YouTube channel as well as Facebook very soon. And on Anchor FM, you can listen to the audio of the podcast. It can be found on Google Podcast, Spotify, and many others. And of course, if you're interested in learning how to improve your marketing and LinkedIn presence, feel free to contact me on LinkedIn and mention this podcast for a free 15-minute discovery call. So that's it for this week. Again, it goes very quickly. Until next time, this is Chuck Hester reminding you to stay well, stay connected, and always pay it forward.